Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
All right, my friends, welcome to the Todd Huff Show. This is not Todd. Todd is in jail. He is incarcerated in the big house, the slammer, the hoose cow, taken there by the paddy wagon. Got his one phone call, called me in a panic saying, "You've got to get over to the studio and record my show and then come bail me out." Obviously, none of that is true. In truth, I really love Todd to death. I tell you, I have traveled extensively in the United States and other foreign countries, met a lot of people in my lifetime, and of all the people I have ever met, Todd Huff is one of them. And I mean that sincerely. All right, enough silliness. Let me introduce myself. I am Tony Reffeitt. First and foremost, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. Been walking with him for over 50 years now. I've got a wife and 3 kids, 2 of whom are adults now. And we live in a suburb of Indianapolis. I'm a real estate broker and owner of Integrity Real Estate. Been doing that every day since 1994, helping people net the most and stress the least. One quick plug here, which is I'm starting a real estate podcast called The Real Scoop. The Real Scoop in Real Estate. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up realintegrity.com/scoop. realintegrity.com/scoop. Okay, enough introductory stuff. Let's get down to brass tacks, as Todd would say. 2 topics we want to take up today. The first is, why does federal affordable housing policy generally make housing worse? Our second topic will be, why is anti-Semitism on the rise in America? 2 very timely, very important topics that we're going to go into here today. So I hope you'll stay with us throughout and we'll have a good time and learn some stuff. Most people do not realize that right now in Washington, they are cooking up some pretty major housing legislation. One of those bills is called the Housing for the 21st Century Act. That one has already passed the House. And then there's another one that's already passed the Senate called the Road to Housing Act. So you can look those up and see where they stand currently. Neither are law yet, but both are being sold as the answer to America's affordable housing crisis. Let me read you a few things that these bills address. Zoning and land use reforms, transit-oriented development, infill housing, streamlining regulations, modernizing HUD programs, expanding federal affordable housing grants. So some of those sound like a lot of gobbledygook. Some of them sound good on the surface, but that's the problem with a phrase like affordable housing. Once you read the fine print, you realize that federal affordable housing just means the government's in charge. Kind of like whatever they're in charge gets more expensive. Have you noticed that? Think about education, or think about healthcare, or we could talk about a million things that the government does that makes it more expensive. Well, that's true even though they use the word affordable housing. So that's my first takeaway here I want you to come away with is, when you hear affordable housing coming out of a federal bureaucrat's mouth, it should trigger your response as if somebody's at your front door saying, "Hi, I'm with the IRS and I'm here to help you." I mean, yes, Of course, who wouldn't want affordable housing? I mean, insurance premiums are up, deductibles are up, coverages are down, interest rates have made people's payments challenging for many in middle America. The cost of living, utilities are way up, maintenance costs are way up. I got a plumber coming to my house tomorrow. Makes me think of the story where the plumber gives his invoice to the homeowner. And the homeowner's like, good night, that is so expensive. That's ridiculous. You've only been here a few hours. I'm a doctor and I don't make that much money per hour. The plumber goes, neither did I back when I practiced medicine. Yeah. So nobody would say we're not for affordable housing, right? We all want affordable housing. It affects every individual, every family, indeed our national economy to greater degrees than perhaps a lot of economists would admit. But the politicians, they take that pain point and they respond saying, hey, don't worry, we'll fix it. And what does that usually mean? That means they're going to tax your dollars. They're going to run it through 47 layers of bureaucracy. They're going to skim off some of that for their consultants, cough, cough. Then they're going to send that money back to your state, back to your municipality with a note saying, hey, here's your money. Now do exactly what we tell you. So that, my friend, is not a free market. That is central planning, albeit with a nice, pretty updated twist and a nice slogan, affordable housing. But the government doesn't just want housing, they want their prescribed housing. And that's what you find in these two bills. Generally, their prescribed housing translates into things like small lots, high density, multifamily, subsidies upon subsidies, units near transit lines. They love transit. Politicians love it like Kamala Harris loves a yellow school bus or a Venn diagram. But have you been on public transit lately? I mean, would you choose public transit if you had another option? I doubt it. Most Americans would say no. Then Washington, they want to plan your community as if we all want to live on some European postcard. But have you ever heard the phrase, nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there? Well, that's what applies here. From a subsidy standpoint, they will subsidize so much of this, subsidizing the developer, the buyer, the tenant, then act shocked when the project doesn't turn out like they've promised. Have you been to an affordable housing complex lately? Go there and tell me, would you choose to live there if you had other options? I doubt it. Here's the deal. Incentive matters. When you've got all these subsidies, somebody else is paying, people are going to treat things differently. As the saying goes, nothing parties like a rental. Well, that's human nature, and it applies to any form of housing subsidy. It's just another tentacle of socialism. You know, think about the Unaffordable Care Act, Obamacare. Did that make health insurance more affordable? No. Will federal affordable housing subsidies cure our housing challenges? No. It will exacerbate them. And then let me add something here in that probably nobody in Washington is going to say, but it's basic economics, supply and demand. If you increase demand faster than you increase supply, what happens? Prices go up. That is not conservative ideology. That's not liberal ideology. That is simple, basic, common sense math. I'm pretty sure I could explain that to my fifth grader, and she would grasp it and articulate it. And here's the reality. Over the last few years, we've had millions upon millions of people enter this country, many illegally, and every single one of them needs a place to live. whether it's an apartment, a starter home, a rental, some sort of shelter somewhere. So if you're wondering why rents are up and you're wondering why first-time buyers can't find anything, you can't ignore the demand shock to the system that those millions of illegals added to this thing. It's like throwing 30 people extra into a game of musical chairs. You wouldn't act surprised at the end when people are standing. Yeah, so you can't fix this affordability problem while you're pretending that math isn't real. And think about all these subsidies, all this taxation, these illegal immigrants are not paying into that system. Let me step back just a second and give you this kind of foundational concept, pretty basic. But most wealth in America, and most middle class, average American wealth has been built a very boring way. Buy a house, pay down the mortgage, build some equity, let time do its thing. That's the American dream. That American dream is built on these pesky little concepts of capitalism and free property rights that the left and so many politicians are not all about. But all these new government policies increasingly create a permanent renter class. The big investors are scooping up the housing stock. Government subsidizes the demand. And then you've got the regular folks stuck competing in a market that's increasingly rigged. That's not opportunity, that's managed dependency. Now, speaking of investors, we need to talk for a minute about Wall Street and foreign capital. This is a bit of a hobby horse for me. It's happening all over America. You cannot talk about the problem with affordable housing and not realize that massive institutional investors, the REITs, real estate investment trusts, are buying up so much of American residential housing stock, primarily at the entry points, the REITs and the private equity firms. So owner-occupants are being priced out because they can't compete with these offers from companies that own 20,000 houses. It's hard for them to compete with BlackRock when they just want to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on any street in America. And the problem is those federal subsidies are not stopping the REITs and the private equity firms and the foreign investing from taking up all our housing stock. Instead, in many ways, they are subsidizing it. And the big investors are positioned to scoop up so much supply. We are slowly turning America into a nation of renters, a permanent class of renters with owners above them. That's not the American dream. That's feudalism with an HOA. I mean, there are places in Europe where that's already true. Primarily only elites own their homes. And if this process of allowing real estate investment trusts to buy up our single-family residences is allowed to continue, imagine America in 20 years. If as we've established, most American wealth has historically been built partially on the concept of home ownership, and now we've got a younger generation that's priced out of getting into the game of home ownership because the competition from the REITs, we're literally going to sentence posterity to generational poverty. Then you add in the fact that much of this institutional buying of America's residences comes in the form of institutional investors that are foreign capital buying up American residential real estate. And it's really at the heart, it's a national security matter. And it's happening right before our eyes. It's been happening for years. Very little is talked about on it, and very little is done to curtail it. Much of conservatism, middle America, even moderates have had their eyes opened since 2020, because now common in the culture is talk of the dangers of the deep state, big government, big pharma, big education, the big industrial food complex, big healthcare, legacy media. People now talk commonly of the dangers of all that, and they have their eyes open to that. But how often do you hear anybody talking about the dangers of big real estate? And I will tell you, I don't think it's often enough. When I talk about that topic in a social gathering, a lot of people seem to have some barrier in their mind that won't let them digest the conversation. I watch the gears turn in their brain, and I don't know if that's because they instantly go to concern for their kids and their grandkids, and that's where they get stuck in a mental cul-de-sac, or if it's because this whole conversation, this whole topic has snuck up on them and they don't realize how prevalent it is, and it's their first introduction to this. I'm not sure. But it's been very surreal as I have this conversation with people in social gatherings, to where I kind of have stopped saying it because it's a party killer. But hopefully here, as we talk about it with a national audience, maybe we can help people bridge this watershed moment in American history that we realize we need Americans owning American residences as their single-family, owner-occupied home primarily. That's the goal. It doesn't work for everybody. Obviously, there's going to be renters. There's nothing wrong or sinful about renting, but we want to foster home ownership. Let me talk for a minute about the concept of the ideological battle that's going on here. Really, conservatives have been losing this ideological battle because it's been happening while we've been taking up these other debates. We have not been realizing that the ideological battle in affordable housing and in housing policy is taking place. It's not just economics, it's culture, it's ideology. Here's some of the crazy things you will hear in these policy debates. They'll say things like suburbs are immoral, or roads and bridges are racists, or single-family zoning is oppressive. I mean, that's the crazy baloney that's baked into these policy conversations now. And the goal that they have is social engineering, packing people in. They want these 15-minute cities. They want to mandate outcomes, redesign our communities from Washington, D.C. That is not compassion. That is federal control. So here's the takeaway. The more federal government interferes in housing, the less affordable it becomes. Big government meddling in the free housing market creates entitlement, dependency, which ultimately becomes enslavement to indebtedness and is so unsustainable. But the private sector will always respond far better to the demand than Washington ever will. Let me throw this out too, very important, that zoning decisions need to be made local, not dictated by federal dollars and bureaucrats who couldn't find your town on a map. We've got to make those zoning decisions stay local, where the people who've got the stake in it, the risk and the reward and the decisions are borne by the local folks. So it's easy for me to sit here and complain. Fixing all of this would be harder, right? What do we do to resolve America's housing problems? I wish we could turn back the clock, go back to capitalism in our housing, and get these affordable housing policies from Washington that have created these problems off the table. But that's not going to happen, right? I'm a realist. I realize we can't put that cat back in the bag. The ship has sailed. So what do we do? Again, I wish I could just take all these socialist and subsidies things out of the way. But since we can't, if there were one thing I was going to do, and I don't think they're ever going to do this because they want to placate their masses, they want to get reelected, please their donors, line their pockets, right? But if there's one thing we could do, we should incentivize the other side of the spreadsheet. We should incentivize if any builder or investor or seller, owner sold their single family resident to an owner occupant, give that a tax credit. If you want to incentivize something, make a tax credit. It'd be limited, but do it for those who sell to an owner occupant. That way, we're helping families build equity, and we're not turning America into a nation of renters. So that's it, folks. That's the point here. These federal policies aimed at solving the affordable crisis, which is a crisis that's been created by the federal government, are A, allowing institutional investing to dictate the availability and the affordability of our housing stock, B, subsidizing the demand, that's just socialism, and C, creating the demand shock that has been the influx of all these illegal aliens competing for our housing. So we need to stop subsidizing systems, start freeing American citizens to be incentivized by a free and fair trade market. America works best when America can own property, build wealth, and thrive, not when Washington tries to engineer our communities from the top down 1,000 miles away. I wish we had a lot more time to elaborate on this, but we are up against a break here. When we come back, we will talk about why is anti-Semitism on the rise in America. This is Tony Reffeitt sitting in for Todd Huff on the Todd Huff Show. If you want to catch our real estate podcast, sign up at realintegrity.com/scoop. All right, stay with us through the break. All right, my friends, welcome back here to the Todd Huff Show. I'm Tony Reffeitt sitting in. Hopefully you enjoyed the first segment there on affordable housing policies in Washington, D.C., and hopefully this will be of help to you. Now we want to turn our attention, shift our gears to the topic of answering the question, why is anti-Semitism on the rise in America? First and foremost, you should know I'm very pro-Israel, so you will find that unapologetically pro-Israel. You'll find that throughout this segment. But this anti-Semitism rising in America, that's not just a headline. That's not just a social media conversation. This is real hatred showing up in real places and real violence. So it's absolutely something we need to talk through and understand. This America that was founded on the Judeo-Christian values that have been the bedrock, the underpinning, the foundation for our nation and our society for 250 years. And America has been a staunch supporter of Israel, one of Israel's greatest allies, and vice versa. But now, in recent days, there's this quickly rising anti-Semitic tide sweeping America. Why is that, and what's the big picture? First, let me step back a fraction and define our terms. For the purpose of our conversation today, we're going to define anti-Semitism as hatred of and or persecution of the Jews. I realize when you say the term anti-Semitism, you could talk about how Semitic languages describe many Middle Eastern people groups, and you could get way off into the weeds on those terms and the meanings and the history and everything. But let's just say this much and agree to this, that when I say anti-Semitism for today, we're meaning hatred or persecution of Jews. And even in that definition, let me say the term Jews, I'm meaning that it refers to Israelites, any who trace their bloodline to the 12 tribes of Israel, i.e. the sons of Jacob. Okay? So with that much out of the way, our first topic question becomes, is anti-Semitism actually even rising in America? Yes, it absolutely is. It's not just because people have more access and more time on their smartphone to see it. It is rising measurably so. The Anti-Defamation League reported over 9,000 anti-Semitic incidences in a year, the highest number ever recorded, including harassment, vandalism, threats, assaults. FBI crime data shows that Jewish Americans are only 2% of the population, and yet they're the target of the majority of religious-based hate crimes. 2%, yet the biggest share of religious-based hate crimes are perpetrated against Jewish Americans. That's not a coincidence. That is a cultural alarm bell. And think of the college campuses, places that are supposed to teach people how to think critically. Man, the incidences there of anti-Semitism have risen dramatically, especially since Hamas's brutal attack on the Jews. This isn't imagined. This is real. The rise in America is significant. Throughout history, however, anti-Semitism has remained pervasive all around the world. You go all the way back to the Egyptian enslavement, brutality at the hands of the Assyrians. You can think of Haman trying to eliminate the Jews in the time of Esther, the subjection to the Babylonians, the atrocities and blasphemies at the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes. Same with numerous Roman emperors. We got the Black Death, the plague, the pogroms. The Holocaust is the most notorious, infamous one that we're familiar with in our day. These are just a small list of the devastations perpetrated against the Jews throughout the ages and around the world. And the question that raises is why? Why are the Jews so universally throughout the ages and around the world persecuted? I think there are 5 primary lies that have been told about the Jewish people to justify people's persecution of them. So I'm going to list those 5 lies and explain them for you here. Number 1 is Darwinian evolution. Hitler used this to rank his Aryan people as superior and to rank the Jews as inferior, and then justify a nation slaughtering millions of Jews and others who didn't fit Hitler's understanding and beliefs on Darwinian evolution. Next up, scapegoating. Throughout history, the Jews have been blamed for things like the fires in Rome, the plague, the Black Death. I mean, there have just been tons of examples of Jews being scapegoated throughout history around the world. The third big lie is that the Jews represent some economic cabal, and they're maligned as if they're these puppet masters controlling the strings of the world's economy. Fourthly, and this one's very popular currently in the college campuses, especially amongst your socialist Marxist sorts of folks, saying that the Jews are guilty of genocide and they're guilty of oppression, when that's just the exact opposite of what evidence and history and truth would point out. It would give you an entirely opposite conclusion if you were a reasonable person. But, so little of this is about reason or truth or rational thinking. It's ultimately just a justification for hatred and crimes against Jews that these folks are seeking. The fifth and final one I'll deal with right now, a lie that is just perpetrated about the Jews to justify the anti-Semitism and oppression and persecution towards them, is perhaps the most prevalent of all of them in our day, which is Jews as Christ killers. The argument goes, hey, we love Jews. The Jews killed Christ. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We love Christ. The Jews killed Christ, therefore we hate the Jews. So if you can't be more theologically honest than to understand the concept that in the deepest sense we can hang the death of Christ around the necks of all humanity, you've really missed the point. I mean, every one of us, myself included, we're sinners. Christ died willingly to pay the price for your sin and mine, to provide redemption, and he took our place on the cross to suffer there. So in the deepest sense, we are all culpable for the death of Christ. So those are the biggest reasons I think that people justify their persecution of the Jews. Now, let's turn our attention more closely to America in 2026. Let me lay this groundwork for you. There are three primary ideologies on the left today that are competing for dominance. These ideologies are perhaps the greatest threat to Western civilization. First, I would list wokeism. Second, and you'll lump these together, socialist Marxist, we'll just call it socialist Marxism. And third, Islamism. Those three competing ideologies all are anti-Semitic, fervently anti-Semitic. Just as an aside, I think the Islamists will win out in their fight for dominance amongst the left eventually. But all three of those ideologies are being used by the left to subvert and co-opt Americans into anti-Semitism. Jews are cast as intolerant oppressors who control the world's economy and unworthy to live. They're also cast as subhuman, therefore worthy of inhuman treatment. What is especially odd now is just recently a lot of influencers and podcasters on the right, a lot of the talking heads on the right wing have jumped on this anti-Semitic bandwagon. I think a lot of this is just sheer profit. They're literally being paid to say these things, and they're willing to say whatever. But then a number of them also have bought into conspiratorial narratives, or they see isolationism as America's only path forward. But then there's some on the neo-right who use ethnicity to justify their hatred. So we're seeing it both on the left and now on the right and the neo-right, this anti-Semitism. I'm up against a break. We will come back and talk about this more in just a second. This is Tony Reffeitt sitting in on the Todd Huff Show. All right, welcome back to the Todd Huff Show. This is Tony Reffeitt. We are talking about why anti-Semitism is on the rise in America. We established the fact that it is very prevalent on the left, now even surging from many on the right. And here is another component of this. There is a very insidious source of anti-Semitism in America coming out of the American church. The Catholic Church was historically pretty anti-Semitic, Though in recent decades and recent years, they've tried to soften that and improve their relationship with the Jews. Here's the great irony, though. In recent years, the Protestant church in America has entered a state of flux regarding its position towards the Jews. I know this will hit a tender nerve with a lot of folks. A lot of my friends who will hear this will have immediate backlash to it. So I'm not just painting with a broad brush that anybody in a Protestant church is anti-Jewish. Obviously, that's not true. But let me explain why a lot of anti-Semitism is rising in the Protestant church in America today. There is this resurgence of interest in Reformed theology. The primary reformers were John Calvin and Martin Luther. They were the primary thought leaders of the Reformation. Both of those folks, Calvin and Luther, were both very anti-Semitic. And Calvin was a major proponent of what's called the replacement theology. Replacement theology says that God's done with Israel and that the church is its replacement. But once you receive a replacement theology mindset, you're going to read the entire Bible differently. And here's what I would say. If I can't trust God to keep all of those literal, clear promises to his chosen people, the nation of Israel, then how can I trust him with my personal destiny, my eternal hope in heaven? So ultra-reformed theology can become man-centered, a focus on our salvation, so much so that it misses the fact that the actual big picture of the Bible is God's glory. The plan of redemption is the primary subset to that, but the main theme is the glory of God. And as such, God is going to keep his promises. His grand plan, yes, involves today's church, but also involves his people Israel. The Jews today, indeed, are largely spiritually dead. They're opposed to Jesus as Messiah. We understand that. But eventually, the Bible tells us they are going to repent and turn to faith in him. Read Ezekiel 36 through 39. Makes it super clear that they are going to have a spiritual revival in the last days. If 1948, when the Jewish nation was birthed again, how does that not stand as clear testimony to the fact that God is still at work in his people Israel? Here's a people who spent 1,800 years scattered, persecuted all around the world. And now 1948 comes along. They're back in their land with their history, their culture, their heritage, their language still intact. If you could just evaluate that one event in light of the Bible, in light of so many Old Testament prophets, but especially Ezekiel 36 through 39, that'll make it really simple for you. It's clear that God is going to revive his people, the Jews, when it's all said and done. Why else is this tiny nation at the center of the world's daily conversations, dominating our news stories, our college campuses, our political dialogue? It's because we are nearing the end times as they're described in the Bible, and Satan is that much more fervently opposing God's plan. God's plan involves, yes, his church, but also his people, the Jews, who are going to repent and turn to him in the end. So I don't agree with everything Israel does. I don't agree with everything America does, though I love America and I would die fighting to defend America. But to be anti-Semitic is to fall for those lies of the devil. I shared with you how they're prevalent today. Don't fall on that side of the coin. Fall on God's side. Jesus Christ is God the Son and the Son of God. He is fully God in his divinity, and he is fully Jewish in his humanity. So you cannot fall for the lie of the devil and become anti-Semitic. All right, that's all the time I have today. If you want to hear more from us, go to realintegrity.com/scoop. What a privilege to sit in for the Todd Huff Show. This is Tony Reffeitt. God bless you. Until next time, take care.